Oh, hello there. I was just taking advantage of this nice weather to, catch some rays while I can, I'm not trying to look like a pasty white ghost all year long, so I thought, why not go out and get a tan? Well, not out, I don't really go out there, because among other things, like never feeling the touch of a woman, I've actually never been outside. Oh, there it goes again. It'd really be nice to get a little more sunshine today. It just keeps going behind the clouds. What the? Well, this wasn't really what I meant, but I guess we'll roll with it. Super Mario Sunshine is probably one of the more unpopular entries in the Mario series, but for the people who are fans of the game, boy do they really love the game. Sunshine is one of those games with such a dedicated and die-hard fan base that they are often resented by others for how passionate they tend to be about it. I always wondered why these people had such an undying love for this seemingly ordinary game in comparison to the other 3D Mario titles. So, having never played through the game in its entirety myself, and never really liking it when I did play it originally, I wanted to experience the game from a point of view that wasn't clouded by one particular and very powerful force. It's time to take a look at Super Mario Sunshine without the curse of nostalgia.
Super Mario Sunshine! Woohoo!
Nostalgia, a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. Every person most likely has a period of time from their childhood or younger years that they remember as somewhat of a utopian reality, devoid of hardships, responsibilities, pain, and the like. Because of the amount of enjoyment and positive experiences they took part in during that time period, their mind naturally blocks out or suppresses any negative experiences that took place during that same time. Consequently, you can begin to see the raw power that nostalgia can have on a person. In some scenarios, it can be deceptive, reminding of the phrase, "it's not as good as you remember." And that's what I want to talk about today. Nostalgia is an emotion, and like all emotions, it can cloud your judgment and cause you to reminisce on things, places, or experiences that might have been much less enjoyable than your mind is telling you they originally were. Dude, do you remember that day when you were younger and my mom took us to ice cream, then a movie, and then when we got home, there was a bounce house in our backyard? Nothing gets much better than being a kid, man. The whole reason she took us to all that is because your dog got hit by a car. If we apply this to Super Mario Sunshine, it's obvious that the nostalgia epidemic has had a strong influence on others' perception of the game, at least from a design standpoint. Upon this game's release, and for years to come, Sunshine was fairly well regarded by critics and fans alike. Obviously, the positive reviews upon release would not be rooted in the clouded judgment of nostalgia, so allow me to explain my justification for these high review scores before moving forward. The thing is, Super Mario Sunshine is still a great game, relatively speaking. Compared to many other games, especially at that time, it was a technical marvel and a fresh and exciting gameplay experience. However, compared to other Mario games, even the ones that came before it, it falls extremely short in terms of its overall polish and feel. This game, at least to me, feels like a step backwards from Super Mario 64 in terms of the design and gameplay in some areas. And that's not a claim you'd expect to hear about the sequel to a character's first 3D game ever, that was released during a time where 3D games themselves were still fairly primitive. For those who may not know, Super Mario Sunshine's later stages of development were heavily rushed because of overwhelming demand and pressure from shareholders, as well as there reportedly being a serious lack of third-party titles to fill the release gaps on the GameCube for that year. Because of this, many aspects of the game had to be glossed over during its development to meet the unreasonable release window. The entire game took only around a year and a half to finish, and was even openly admitted to suffer from severe time constraints in an interview with Miyamoto in 2003, nearly a year after the game was released. Most notably, at least 5 levels in the game were scrapped during development. The names of these places can actually still be found in the game's files, and include some pretty intriguing titles like Fire Shrine, Warship Island, and Irrit Rock. Additionally, Corona Mountain, the game's final level, was also intended to be a full level with multiple missions to complete, and the episode select text for the level is also still included in the game's files. To add salt to the wound, there was also planned to be a train station in Delfino Plaza used to take you to all the various levels across the island. Instead, for the entrances of levels, well, we'll talk about that in a bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, a lot of stuff was left out of the game in order to meet the release window, so instead, what was already in the game was kept, and developers frantically attempted to add enough content to make something that could even be considered a substantial final product. After doing this, there simply just wasn't enough time to go back and polish up the content they already had in before being rushed, let alone all the stuff they scrambled to add in after being given that deadline. This has been the unfortunate scenario that many games have encountered and suffered the consequences of for years. If I may reference the famous quote from Shigeru Miyamoto himself, where he says that a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. This statement reigns true for any form of media, but you can see the strategy being utilized by Nintendo themselves multiple times after the stressful development cycle of Super Mario Sunshine, with the delay of Twilight Princess during that same console era, and even today with their delays of Animal Crossing New Horizons and, obviously, Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was actually delayed for a grand total of 3 years and released with resounding acclaim. It's a tried and true strategy to make a game good that may seem obvious, but because of the cutthroat environment that the game development industry can foster with deadlines, crunch time, and pressure from shareholders, many developers fall victim to the repercussions of rushing a game to launch anyway. But that issue is a topic for another time. Returning to the discussion of nostalgia though, I'd like to shed some more light on the reason Super Mario Sunshine may seem so much more amazing to some people than it does others. Depending on when you were born, your childhood may have partially taken place during the GameCube era, which was roughly from 2001 to 2006. Obviously, the majority of people will romanticize their childhood as a simpler and happier time where they didn't have to worry about the many things that come with being older, or even if their childhood wasn't the best, they may have remembered playing Super Mario Sunshine as an escape from what they had to deal with in their life. In either of these scenarios, Sunshine is painted as a source of happiness and comfort. Depending on when you were born, this could also be the case for you as well, but with Super Mario 64, or Galaxy, or any other game really, because video games are forms of media that utilize your sense of hearing, sight, and touch. The power of nostalgia that they generate can be considerably more powerful than any other media such as books, music, or movies. This is why you see so many people have sworn their allegiance to their favorite childhood game, no matter the quality. It holds a special place in their heart, and no one can ever take that away from them.
Wow. What a touching message. Weren't we talking about a f***ing Mario game? Let me have my moment!
Before I talk about what bothers me with Super Mario Sunshine, I want to mention all the aspects of the game that I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm obviously not here to only bash the game for its shortcomings. First off, let's talk about the world, which I think is a huge strong point of this game's design. The game is set entirely on a tropical island known as Isle Delfino, with each of the game's levels taking place at a different location on the island. Many levels in the game are even visible from the other levels, creating a sense of realism in the world that greatly contributes to building its identity. Each level has a specific and intentional geographical location on the island, and you can even see that by looking at the map screen in-game. Additionally, each of the levels are composed of 8 main missions. The cool thing about the structure of these missions in sequence is that they function similar to the World Peace goal in Super Mario Odyssey. For context, in Odyssey, each kingdom would be facing some form of adversity when Mario arrives, whether it be an entire desert being frozen over or a giant evil bird wreaking havoc over the inhabitants. Mario either had the option to get the required amount of moons and just move on to the next kingdom, or he could collect a specific set of story moons to achieve world peace in that specific kingdom. Throughout the collection of these story moons, the environment of the kingdom dynamically changes based on what Mario has accomplished so far. This alone heavily contributes to world building because the progression of these tasks tell a story about the kingdom and its inhabitants without having to offer too much exposition, such as cutscenes and long strings of text boxes. A very similar mechanic is utilized in Super Mario Sunshine, and I don't really see this mentioned often. While I personally think the mechanic was executed better in Odyssey, Sunshine's mission structure allows for some impressive storytelling and world building with barely any exposition at all. The most satisfying part about designing a game's progression in this fashion is the obvious and deliberate impact of the player being shown to them in the context of real people and locations within the game. They can actually see that they improved lives, eliminated conflict, or just brought people together, and that can make for a very gratifying gameplay experience. In the same realm of conversation, the small bit of story the game does offer through cutscenes and some NPC text conversations throughout each level's missions is fairly good in my opinion. Sure, the voice acting in the cutscenes is comically bad, but I feel it adds quite a bit of charm to the game.
Leave my mama alone, you bad man. I won't let you take Mama Peach away. Mama?
What the hell?
I'd personally say that this entry had the perfect amount of story in the sense of a Mario game. Even though Mario games are expected to keep it minimal in that department, I still believe that having a little bit is necessary in creating a believable and livable world, which is extremely important to my enjoyment of games at least. The majority of Mario games, especially in the 2D genre, tend to have extremely generic and short-sighted stories. Obviously, I do not expect the next Mario game to pull off the same amount of exposition seen in an 80-hour-long JRPG, because in a game as simple and as casual as this one, it's definitely of hindrance to the design to make that decision. In the case of Mario, as long as there's enough to make the world feel alive and to give it an identity, the story has served its purpose. Then there is Delfino Plaza, the main hub world for the entirety of the game from which every level is accessed. This area is by far my favorite part of the game. The plaza packs so many secrets, charming conversations with residents, and enjoyable challenges, and feels like the most heavily polished area in the game by far. This is how you do a hub world, and I'd love to see more games do something like this. It is just so rich with content, even though it could have easily been used simply as a slightly more complex method of traveling between the levels. This type of hub world is something we've actually seen drift away in recent 3D Mario releases, with both of the Galaxy games hub worlds feeling much more bare bones than their predecessors, and Odyssey essentially not having one at all. However, with the way Odyssey is designed, a hub world wouldn't make much sense because your adventure wasn't really centralized to come back to one location after each event. If we go back to Galaxy though, the hub worlds did not pack nearly as many secrets into them and actually never contained any of the game's main collectibles. So, while the Comet Observatory in Galaxy 1 is probably my favorite looking hub world of all time, I feel it could have greatly benefited from something similar to the Castle Secret Stars from Mario 64, or even some sort of secondary collectible. Speaking of secondary collectibles, let's talk about blue coins. Now, I know there's quite a bit of stigma surrounding these and the validity of their inclusion in the game, and I'm going to talk about that too, but I still believe there are a few redeeming qualities to them that many often overlook. They seem to be viewed in a purely negative light, which in my opinion shouldn't be the case. For those who may not know, blue coins are a secondary collectible in the game that are hidden literally everywhere. There are 30 in each stage and quite a few in Delfino Plaza as well. For every 10 blue coins the player finds, one shine sprite can be redeemed at a house in Delfino Plaza in exchange for those coins. It's quite obvious that these collectibles were added as another product of rushed development, as a whopping 24 of the game's shine sprites are locked behind the redeeming of these coins. However, like I said, before I point out the flaws in how they were executed, I want to go over a few things I actually liked about them. First off, some of the blue coin locations are very well thought out or well hidden. I enjoyed finding a select few of them that weren't just copy-paste renditions of the same method of obtaining the coin, but just in different locations. Another good thing about having these blue coins is that they offer up variety in the collectibles. I always enjoy having more than one collectible to look for in a game, whether it be as simple as the stamp collectibles in 3D World, or the wide variety of things to find in something like Banjo-Kazooie. Other than that though, yeah, I really don't have any other nice things to say about these.
You are a disappointment.
And finally, I want to talk about Flood, Mario's robot water tank companion and movement assistant throughout the entirety of the game. Flood has 4 separate nozzle attachments that can all be obtained and used as the player progresses through the game. First off, there's the spray nozzle, which stays equipped to Flood at all times. This nozzle allows Mario to spray water in any direction to clean up graffiti, defeat enemies, and much more. The next nozzle is the hover nozzle, which, as the name suggests, allows Mario to hover in midair for a short amount of time. This mechanic has the potential to be extremely useful to the player because it enables an extra level of maneuverability in midair that can help out a ton in areas that require precision-based platforming. Or perhaps the player misjudged their jump and needs a little more distance to make it to the next platform, or they just need a little more height before they can grab onto the ledge they attempted to jump to. The hover nozzle is by far the nozzle with the most utility in this game. The other 2 nozzles, the rocket and turbo nozzles, have their applications but aren't utilized nearly as much as a necessity in the level design. I still appreciate their additions for the sake of variety though, and they're honestly pretty fun to use when it is practical to do so. A large portion of the game's design is built around either using Flood to clean up stuff with the spray nozzle, or by platforming using any of the other nozzles, and I'm a big fan of the uniqueness that it manages to bring to the gameplay. Sadly though, this is where my praise for the game comes to an end. Because of Super Mario Sunshine's aforementioned rushed development, a lot of aspects of the game that could have been great fell short and were detrimental to the overall enjoyment of the player. And unfortunately, the list of those is considerably longer than the aspects I did enjoy about the game. The saddest part about this is that nearly every issue I mentioned can be explained by the rushed development and lack of time to polish and refine the game as a whole. I can't help but wonder how good this game could have been if the circumstances were different. Regardless, the first thing I want to mention is the controls. The controls in Super Mario Sunshine show some signs of a lack of polish in extensive testing. They seem way less responsive and tactile than any of the previous games. Yes, even Super Mario 64 in some scenarios. At many points they can seem extremely finicky and without proper knowledge of them can cause some pretty unnecessary damage, loss of progress, or even deaths. Though, a lot of these control discrepancies could however be related to the seemingly unfinished / sloppy level geometry in many areas of the game. Flood seems to be the saving grace for the controls though, because of how much mid-air correction you actually get with the hover nozzle. Whenever the game takes Flood away from you, which usually happens in the majority of the game's secret stages, the controls really begin to show their issues. In these stages, Mario is given a relatively short platforming challenge to complete without any assistance from Flood. The worst part about this, as I've already mentioned, is how horribly unresponsive, janky, and sometimes even glitchy the controls get. There were multiple times where I would straight up just get caught up on the level geometry and Mario would sit there going, It may seem like I feel as if these controls are completely broken and unplayable, but trust me, that is not what I mean to convey. They are far from that, but I am holding these controls up to the Mario standard, which sets a much higher bar than most other games. Nintendo is known for making extremely polished and curated experiences with their games that feel great to play all the time. With Sunshine, it wasn't always like that, especially at first. The little quirks and tiny issues with the controls stick out like a sore thumb, but I will admit they became far more tolerable once I learned to get around their nuances. However, as I've been saying, this is a Mario game. We've come to expect the controls to feel good right off the bat for even the most casual of players. Not something you have to learn to circumvent through repeated and frustrating trial and error throughout the first several hours of your playthrough. Some of my frustration with the secret levels may also come from the lack of polish in the design of the levels themselves. Because Mario doesn't have Flood, the actual mid-air maneuverability of the player is extremely minimal. It seems almost like an oversight to create such precise platforming sections within these stages and not give Mario any more mid-air maneuverability than he had in 64. In this entry, we don't even get the long jump, so once Flood is gone, we are even more limited than we were in the previous entry in terms of movement. Additionally, if I'm being completely honest, some of the conceptual designs of a few secret stages are, in my opinion, just straight up bad. Take for example Mission 5 in Pianta Village, where you play through a secret stage in which you talk to Piantas that will then proceed to throw you in whatever direction you were facing when you talk to them after you close their text box. This mission can get extremely annoying because in some setups, the angle that you have to talk to the Pianta at is abnormally precise. Obviously, messing up this angle will lead to death, which means you are forced back to the beginning of the stage. But the annoying level design doesn't stop there. In a select few secret levels, the player actually does get to use Flood, but don't let that fool you. Most of these are a pain to deal with as well. The worst and most famous culprit has to be the Pachinko level, in which Mario has to collect 8 red coins throughout a giant Pachinko machine with horribly programmed physics. Even better, you die and have to restart from the very beginning if you fall through the bottom of the machine. And if you run out of lives, you get sent all the way back to Delfino Plaza, where you are forced to travel back to the level's entrance if you want to retry. And for what reason? Well, because Mario has to have lives, right? Regardless, like I said, it is a nightmare to deal with the physics of this level, with large amounts of force being given to Mario out of a complete standstill and obviously more clipping on the level geometry. Frustrations aside, I will admit that the controls outside of these levels and with Flood seem to function relatively well most of the time. Usually they feel as fluid as a 3D Mario game is so famously known for being. It's just these sections which happen to appear frequently enough that just ruin the overall experience for me, regardless of how good they feel any other time. We can, however, see some examples of poor level design sneaking its way into the main levels as well. Many times the game will kill you and force you to lose a life even though it was completely unnecessary to do so. For example, during the red coin collection mission in Rico Harbor, you are asked to ride a blooper around to collect these coins within a certain time limit. However, once you step onto one of these bloopers, there's no turning back. There is no way to stop it and there is no way to get off of it without the use of unintentional glitches. The worst part is, if you hit a wall or collide with anything while riding these bloopers, you receive the sweet and completely fair punishment of instant death. I can't help but wonder why this was the case. It would have made so much more sense to simply have the blooper poof away and drop the player into the water to allow them to retry the challenge. This instant death mechanic is utilized in multiple other places as well. For example, nearly every time there is a timer attached to something within a level, whether it be collecting red coins, killing enemies, or cleaning up graffiti, once that timer reaches 0, instant death. At least in my mind, I would imagine death only occurring when the player takes enough damage to actually die, and not just because they didn't complete an objective fast enough. It would once again make so much more sense to simply allow the player to retry the challenge without any penalty to their pointless lives counter. The unnecessary time the player has to wait between deaths, and especially between game overs, is extremely tedious and just doesn't make sense to have in the game in the first place. Additionally, some missions can just be straight up repetitive, tedious, or boring in their entirety. For starters, many aspects of missions are simply reused with little to no changes, and I'm not talking about the red coin missions or the missions where you catch Shadow Mario either. Let's take the Gooper Blooper boss fights for example. This fight is reused a grand total of 3 times throughout the game, and there is very little change between each one. It was always something along the lines of, get to where the blooper is, fight the blooper, collect the shine sprite. If you're going to have what is essentially the same boss fight happen 3 times in the game, you have to significantly change the boss's mechanic in the subsequent encounters, otherwise it starts to get stale really quick. This same thing happens towards the beginning of the game, where you have to fight a Proto-Piranha around 6 times with little to no difference other than their location. One of the missions that are simply just boring to play through takes place in Serena Beach, where all you do is clean goop up off the ground outside the hotel. That's it, you're on a relatively generous time limit and all you do is spray the ground until the majority of the goop is gone. It is not engaging, no twists or exciting mechanics are thrown at you throughout the mission. You're just cleaning the ground because these people can't seem to go get a hose and do it themselves.
I came as fast as I could. What is going on? Oh, thank God you're here. Can you clean that up? That was the life-threatening emergency? Why couldn't you just pick it up yourself? I left my grandma's funeral for this!
Last but not least, there is quite literally a mission that contains a boss fight where its length relies heavily on pure luck. During one mission in Serena Beach again, you enter the hotel's casino and end up fighting King Boo with a slot machine. To damage him in this fight, the slot machine must roll 3 fruits, after which a large selection of them will pop out. The player must then grab one of the peppers and throw it into King Boo's mouth to damage him, but like I said, whether or not the slot machine rolls 3 fruits is completely random, based on luck. There is no pattern to the rolls or anything, so if you're unlucky, you could be stuck in the boss fight much longer than someone else who happened to be a bit more lucky than you. It almost never makes sense to base anything in a game on luck, especially a single player one. All it does is waste the player's time, and in this case, even promotes underage gambling. I'd also like to talk about Delfino Plaza again for a bit. As I mentioned earlier, this is where every level in the game is accessed. However, I also said that the game was originally supposed to have a train system to bring the player to each level. This would actually at least put some context into the location of the levels and how to travel to them. In the final game, the only levels that are actually contextually entered are Pinna Park and Corona Mountain. All the other levels are either entered through a portal plastered on a random wall in Delfino Plaza, or just a literal pipe, with the exception of Noki Bay, where you look up into the sun to enter it as a callback to Super Mario 64. Since the game puts such a big and obvious emphasis on the world and how it's laid out, it would have been amazing to see every level have an entrance within the context of its location on Isle Delfino in relation to the plaza, which would have worked wonders in creating an even more believable world for Mario to explore. And finally, it's time to talk about the blue coins again. As I mentioned before, these are probably the most prominent result of the rush development of Super Mario Sunshine. Because 24 of the game's shine sprites are locked behind the collection of these coins, they are everywhere. They had to cram 240 of these things across essentially what is 8 levels. Here's the thing though, collecting all of them is much more of a pain than it needed to be. For starters, the only way of tracking your blue coin totals is through the map menu. On this screen, you can hover over a level's name and see the total amount of blue coins you've collected for that specific level. However, there is no way to see how many you have left to collect for that specific level. Also, keep in mind that the game never tells you how many blue coins there actually are in each level, which is 30, so you're just left searching indefinitely if you didn't know that, which will waste a lot of time. Even worse is the fact that many blue coins are exclusive to specific missions as well, and there are 8 missions in each level, meaning that without a guide or prior knowledge, there's probably no way you're finding every blue coin in a reasonable amount of time. Additionally, a lot of the collection methods of these coins are expectedly quite repetitive. A large majority of them are collected by spraying graffiti on various walls throughout every level and in Delfino Plaza as well. A small few are at least a bit more interesting and involve a small platforming challenge to collect them. However, I will admit there's actually a relatively significant number of blue coins that have some pretty interesting collection methods. But the reason I don't want to praise these is because nearly every one of these, presumably better blue coins, will most likely never be discovered by the majority of players. That's because the methods to get them to appear or to find them are extremely obscure with little to no indication of their location whatsoever. Since I used a guide at the very end of my playthrough to find every single one of these super obscure instances, I really enjoyed my time collecting them, as quite a few were pretty creative. However, because of how unfairly hidden these can be, most of the super interesting or at least non-repetitive instances of blue coins obviously never even got discovered on my initial playthrough. At one point, I just straight up stopped going for them because I didn't feel they were worth the hassle of picking up anymore, just because of how monotonous and uninspired most of their locations can be when just running into them in a casual playthrough. Like I said earlier, not all of the blue coins are this bad, and I really appreciate how much they manage to encourage exploration for those who want to look for them. But the fact that the game barely helps you in finding where they are or how many you have left in each area, as well as the locations of many of the coins being in plain sight or some other uninspired location, just ruins the overall experience with them for me. Hypothetically, if Mario was able to obtain an item that, say, made a sound whenever he was near a blue coin, as well as the remaining number of blue coins in each mission being displayed on the mission selection screen, that would make the collection journey vastly more tolerable, and I dare say even enjoyable. Overall, I truly don't think that Super Mario Sunshine is a bad game, but if we're talking in terms of the extremely high standard of quality that Mario has made itself so well known for, this is, in my opinion, as bad as Mario has gotten. I know many people love this game and will stand by it to their grave, and to that I say good for you. Although some people, as I touched on at the beginning, may like this game a bit too much for their own good. However, I would encourage anyone willing to at least take a step back at one point and consider that your judgment may be clouded by some heavy nostalgia. Play the game again with a more critical eye and see if it's still as good as you remember. Or don't. Maybe you're just better off keeping the magic of your childhood intact.
What the hell?
Good evening.
Who the hell are you?
That doesn't matter. Let's just say I really like Super Mario Sunshine.
Oh, I've heard about people like you. You need to get away from me. What makes you think you can come into my house unannounced and watch me sleep?
Well,
Nothing. You know what? I'm calling the police. You're gonna get out of my house.
move another inch and the monkey gets it.
No. Not Diddy. Please.
Take a seat for me.
Please don't do anything to Diddy.
What do you think of that game?
This? It's not really that good in my opinion.
Say it's amazing or I do it.
Why? I don't like it.
You leave me no choice.
No!